Hello, this is Chris Ott, and this is part 5 of this series I've called the Psychic Emergent Universe. And it is going to be the final part of this series, and probably the last post on philosophy or metaphysics that I'm going to do. I might start on something else, or I may not make videos for a while, but I wanted to kind of create a summary of everything I've done for the last actually 5 years now on video. Kind of started out spontaneously. There was a place called the Circle Center nearby where I live, and I was connected with them, and I asked to give a series of talks there, which got videoed, and they're called Baba and the Future, and the Baba in that is Mayor Baba, because I was speaking to a Mayor Baba community, so it was meant for them. But a lot of my ideas do come from the teacher Mayor Baba, who I've talked about in the past. So anyway, it began like that about 5.5 years ago, and then I started just going over there with and borrowing their camera and just doing videos. And eventually, a couple that I do work for, bought me my own camera so that I could do videos for them, and a good tripod. And so I've set this up in my own house and created a green screen behind me. And now, in total, that first series had 11 videos. And since then, I've done about 90 more. And so this is about 100 videos now. And I'm coming to an end. And I wanted to talk about why I'm coming to an end. To my surprise, I feel like these videos and the 2 books that I've written, connected with the same subjects, have really conveyed the ideas that I've had developing all my life. And I'm kind of surprised, because initially I didn't know how to express myself. And I said, put it in, people thought it didn't make sense to them. And now I know that if somebody paid attention and understood the order in which to watch these and read this material, and followed some of the stuff that influenced it, that I've talked about, they would completely get what I'm saying. And how many people do right now? I don't know. This was always kind of intended for the future. That's why that first series was called Baba and the Future. And I have a blog that I call Letters to the Living, because it's for those who are living after I'm gone, and the people that I know are gone. Because anyone who's followed me knows that this idea kind of gradually developed over my life, and then really kind of took form about 20 years ago. And while I was studying philosophy and getting a graduate degree, and then about 3 years after I graduated, I wrote a book which I planned to write called The Evolution of Perception, where I first gave the basic idea. I wrote that book partly to kind of like, copyright it, so that for a legacy of it, that people will know I'm the one that came up with this idea, because I believe that in the future it'll be a common idea. Now, why am I so confident about that? I don't know. I always was. As soon as I had the idea, I kind of jumped up and I went, "Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!" I remember I called a friend and I said, "This is bigger than Einstein. This is the biggest thing, the development ever." And I still hold that that's true, and I believe that this idea actually is true. And anybody's free to disagree, but I think somehow, someday, it's going to become commonplace because it's kind of irrefutable. It's not just plausible. It's kind of inescapable that the world is the result of an evolution of perception. It is a psychic emergence, the result of a psychic emergence, a mental emergence in the imagination of God. And I want to say a few things about that. Why am I so confident? I just always have been. I've never suffered any doubt once I saw it, because it resolves so many issues. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in this last video. But I just wanted to say that I also, before I studied philosophy, I've mentioned that I studied film at the University of Southern California, which was and continues to be considered the best film school in the world, technically. And there was a thing that went around that people would say in film school, and that is, if you ask the question, is there a script that's going around Hollywood that is as great as like Casablanca, and it's been passed from hand to hand for 20 years, and no one ever made that film or bought that film? And the general answer is no, it doesn't exist. People who read scripts basically will tell you they're not most are not very good. And a great script gets made eventually. Somebody will find that script. Anyway, that was the opinion of Hollywood, and has always been, that greatness will eventually be discovered. Truth will always eventually be found. And another thing that I was inspired by was the fact that the heliocentric universe, the idea that the solar system, the idea that the planets are going around the sun, which was a revolution in thinking, that was proposed and published posthumously by a friar named Copernicus. And people read it, but they didn't talk about it. It was still considered heretical, the idea. It was 100 years later that somebody had the clout and the fame and the position, and it was Galileo, who 100 years later championed that belief. And actually, he withstood, he had to come before the Inquisition, and he was put under house arrest. He was never tortured or anything. He just, he had to recant, actually, the view, but by the time he recanted, the world had already heard his own publications about the subject, that he had said that Copernicus was right. So that idea took 100 years to even be for somebody to champion it. And that's what I always thought would happen to my idea. I figured, well, who am I? I mean, I'm as anonymous as a Franciscan friar like Copernicus. I'm not Copernicus. I'm not saying I'm as smart as him or anything like that. I'm just saying I'm kind of anonymous, and that it might be 100 years. But it only take one person to get what I've said and go, he was right. And now I'm told I have a very serious heart condition, and the doctors swear I won't live very long, and my heart will just stop. And so that's good, because sometimes an artist's work is better received when they're gone. And sometimes an idea is better received when it's old than when it's new. And this is only 20 years old. So that sounds kind of dreary, but I don't look at it that way. I look at it as a really kind of cool. And I don't think I'm the center of the universe or so important personally. This has made me feel good about myself, but I would say that the center of my universe at the moment is a 19-year-old opera singer. I just went out of, took a plane, went out of town to see her and meet her for the first time. I've been following her, Amira Willigagen, or Villikagen. I've been following her for about 4.5 years. And I just met her in a restaurant in a small town in Georgia, where her fan organizers put together a little lunch. And then I also saw her perform at a church, and went to the lunch after that too. And that was meeting, to me, the most spiritual person I've ever met in my life. Outside perhaps of the immediate followers of Meher Baba that lived with him, who I met when I was young, they also had that light. But she, of all the people I've met since those days, she has the most powerful light I've ever encountered. I got to talk to her and hear her sing live, and it was very, very moving. And so, I have many people that I love and admire, and it's not all about me or my idea, but I always felt that it was an obligation when I had this idea to give it away. Because no one else is going to ever have this, because they're not going to the stars aren't going to line up again twice. I grew up surrounded by these ideas by Meher Baba, which I've talked about. And my father was an artist, and then I was a filmmaker. And before I studied philosophy, and that is a very odd combination. To study film and work in the industry as a camera assistant, dealing with lenses and filters, and then come to philosophy and see the problems of philosophy and go, oh my God, there's the analogy right there. But it was more than just an analogy of lenses and filters, what I called the perceptual schema, that psychic emergence of evolution of perceptual schemas creating the perceptual world, or the phenomenal world that we perceive and find ourselves in. They also had to have the concept of evolution, an evolution of consciousness, not just an evolution of forms in like Darwinian sense, but an underlying and more fundamental evolution in consciousness. And that comes straight out of Meher Baba's book. So the main chapter in Meher Baba's principal book is actually titled The Evolution of Consciousness. So I got that idea, combined that with the film idea. And then later, after I published my first book, they finally published a later found book by Meher Baba, where he literally did use the analogy of the lenses. So I went, oh my God, I guessed what he was saying. And so I've often said, I've explained what Meher Baba was saying. But it wasn't just Baba. There was also, I've emphasized George Berkeley and his philosophy, and I'm going to talk a little more about that. But also Immanuel Kant, and then in the 20th century, the philosophers Uexkll and the American Norwood Hanson. All of these talking about perception subjectively, and what it changes in the percept, or what you perceive. And but I said I would say something about George Berkeley. George Berkeley was, of every philosopher I ever studied, he's my favorite philosopher. But not just his philosophy, but he himself. It was said of him in his lifetime that it was a man you could find no fault with in his character. He was a little like Amira Willigagen. He was just you knew you were in the presence of someone very fine. And he is in the Anglican church. He's an Anglican saint. And there's a tomb for him in Ireland. And I did my thesis on Berkeley, mostly on Berkeley. It was called Refutations of Idealism, in which I took other philosophers and used their work to try to dispute what Berkeley said about perception. And I showed that they can't. And no one has claimed to have ever been able to dispute Berkeley, but they don't like what Berkeley had to say. But I'll tell you what they don't like about it. And it's exactly what I do like about it. And I hope I've done the same thing. I hope I've gone well beyond Berkeley, beyond where he could have gone in his lifetime, because there were influences that weren't there in 1710 when he wrote his first book at the age of 26. They weren't there. He never heard of the work of Kant. He never heard of evolution. He never heard of psychology, let alone Gestalt psychology, nor lenses, which weren't invented until 20 years before Kant basically created his idea of pure intuitions of time and space. Berkeley could not have thought of those things, but he came so close. And this is what Berkeley said about what he was doing. At the time, I can't remember, there's actually a book just on this subject by Berkeley, where he explains his motivation. His motivation wasn't to have a novel idea, although he did. His idea was called immaterialism, that really things are ideas in the mind of God, and there is nothing, that this word matter has no referent. It's just a human idea with no clear definition, because you only perceive your own ideas, which I've explained. And so if the world is composed of ideas or mental phenomena, like color and sound, and even number is mental. If you didn't know that, well, it is. And it's actually not, that's not controversial. And color is mental. That's not controversial. And I've talked all about this through all these series of films. But if they are ideas, well, where do they originate? And he said, not only do they originate in the mind of God, but it's the only place they could have. Because there had to have been a greater mind. There has to be a greater mind that is having these ideas. And, St. Augustine once said, we see this world, and this world is there because you see it. So he said the same thing. That's in the Confessions toward the end. Confessions of St. Augustine. Saints have often known this. This isn't really that. It's just that I formalized it with concepts that didn't exist in those days. So yeah, I'm very confident. But when I hear about a person who says that they're an atheist, you see Amira, the singer, Amira Villekagen, is very, very, very Christian. One of the most devout celebrities that I know about. And she talks openly about it. And she has fans that are atheists. And yet her songs are about God and the Virgin Mary. And she's openly spiritual. And yet and then I read, well, I'm a convinced atheist. Well, I'll tell you, that might make sense. If by God you mean that guy on the Sistine Chapel that nobody ever imagined before Michelangelo did in about the year 1500. It was commissioned by the Medicis, who had sort of taken over the Vatican. And the Sistine Chapel is what I'm talking about. That's actually a depiction of Zeus. And I've talked about that. That's not God at all. So all the jokes about the man and with the white beard on the cloud, well, that's just bogus. That's not what the spiritual people of the world mean by God. So if you were so convinced that it doesn't exist, well, I'll agree with you. But no real Christian ever said it did. God is formless. And I've said, borrowing from the wording of Mirabel, that we're talking about an infinite intelligence. And I haven't talked about love because a philosopher can't talk about love. But it's there too. This you could call it love, but it's more than that. It is infinite intelligence, and it is in all of us, just as Christians say, the Holy Spirit is in every believer. And so, when a person doesn't believe in God, well, they're forgivable because what they were told about God is probably pretty silly. But they don't know that there are other ways to interpret that word and use that word. And the way I'm using it, not only is God possible and God plausible, but it is actually logically and rationally necessary, a priori. I said that in my second book. I didn't say that in my first book, but I realized it when I was preparing for my second book, where I read for 2 years. I realized, oh my God, it's the same as Berkeley said. God has to exist. Has to exist. There has to be one intelligence, not two, not three, but not a bunch of gods, because the perceiver exists before the lenses that create duality. That means two-ness and separation and number, and time and space, which are also divisions, ways to divide. But that which sees has to transcend because it precedes those imagined perceptual schemata, which is plural for schema. A schema is a way of organizing, so a perceptual schema is a way of organizing what you perceive. So that which is doing that psychologically has to be one, and indivisible, and infinite, and without a second, and eternal. What is that? God. So while I've never talked about it much, this whole idea, like Berkeley's, I'll put the name of the book where he talks about this in the show notes, because I can't remember. It starts with an A. This is a proof that God exists. And God has to exist. But God of a much more subtle and sophisticated sense of the word. And so I think that that's the view, the paradigm, the zeitgeist of some future day when this idea can be embraced. Right now, people are caught up in politics and war and a lot of other things that are distracting them, and divisions of all kinds I won't go into. And they're busy censoring each other, and it's just awful. But one day when this quiets down, however, maybe after a terrible tumult and terrible suffering, who knows? At some point, men will get back to the business of what are we doing here? And what is all this? And does God exist? And how do we know? And then they'll find these videos or my books. Because they can't, you're never going to be able to pull this out of the people that I pulled it out of, because you don't have, I already explained. You have to come to this essentially as an artist and a filmmaker and a man who studied lenses and actually replaced lenses and put on filters and saw, oh my God, that's how you change what you perceive. You look through a different lens, and that's an expression what we use. But I'm saying it very, very plainly. And I'm not trying to convince anybody to join anything. I've never asked for a penny. My first book I paid for myself. My second, you no longer have to pay. I did it through Amazon's new process where I didn't pay 1 cent. I just did the work, and I get a small royalty. So I wanted to say that. That makes me really happy. And this whole project has made me happy. I suffered sometimes, and I was embarrassed sometimes. I was made fun of at the beginning. People don't make fun of me anymore because they get it what I'm saying. They don't know what to say because there's not yet that person. There's not yet that Galileo that can go, that Copernicus, he was right. He got it right. Somebody's going to say that about me one day. It's often the little people that are unknown that are the greatest and most important. And I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about Amira Willakagan as an example. She's not very famous in America. She's very, very famous in South Africa. Right now she's in Los Angeles. When I met her in Georgia last weekend, I was one of the first people to sign up to be able to be there to meet her. And I was waiting in a restaurant near Madison, Georgia. I was waiting in a restaurant on the 9th. And she was coming from giving a concert to old people in a rehabilitation center. Tiny, out-of-the-way place. I don't know the story of how that led to that. She was serving others. And then I didn't know this at the time. I was waiting in the restaurant with a couple other guys. And she walked in, and you know how many people were waiting for her? About 4 people. Because she's not very famous in America. And she had to save her money to come to America. It was her idea. She sort of sprang it on the fans just a couple months before she came. She saved it up from her shows that she does in Africa, which she's immigrated to because she does service there. She has a nonprofit. She's 19 years old. And she saved up her own money and she flew alone. But fans, of course, were there to greet her in Atlanta, coming from Johannesburg. Can you imagine that? A few people. And that's the way it is. Greatness isn't like throngs and millions of dollars. She's not a millionaire. She said so. She's not. She could be, but she won't. She's not even represented by a label. She originally was Sony, but no more. Now she's totally independent because she wants to sing what she wants to sing, and she wants to sing for God, and she wants to spread His name. And even though I talk about Meher Baba and Eastern thought and things like that, I'm totally with her. I admire her. And some of my greatest heroes, including the great philosopher Augustine of Hippo, or better known as St. Augustine, is also one of my favorite people ever. And Berkeley, an Anglican saint. So I feel like I never want Christianity to go away. It's just like some of the little problems about God to be explained. And some of the things that don't make sense in old-time theology could possibly be reoriented and seen through a new set of lenses and seen to be true. And that was the point of that quote I gave that Meher Baba said in his lifetime in the 20th century. He said, "I've come to bring about a revolution in man's thinking, the slowest of all revolutions." I think this is part of that revolution. Forgive me for thinking such a bold thought, but that's what I think. And if I didn't, then why would I be sitting here? I don't monetize anything. I've never had a GoFundMe or any kind of fundraising at all, except once I raised some money for my daughter so she and her husband could get an apartment. But nothing, I've never asked for money for myself or anything. And I've never made a dime from either of my books. They lose money. Well, my second one didn't cost anything, so I guess maybe I've made, a little bit. That's all I have to say. I'll just end with this. I once heard that. I think I read this. I used to follow these videos about video making, about photography, and trying to learn, And the guy said that there was this one guy who did tutorials about photography on YouTube, and they were really good, he said. And then one day, it just did a video called "What is a Duck?" And these videos just started drifting off and being about other things. And I thought that was not just funny, but I got it. And also, the idea of what is a duck is actually a philosophical question. So I would love to make a video about what is a duck. I mean, not that particular one, probably. Maybe what is something else. So maybe I'll do videos about something else. But I'm done with metaphysics. Oh, the last thing was the reason that I'm not going on with these. So I said I've done like 100 videos, and I've done like two short books. Well, what if I had, like many people, I have 1,000 videos. There are plenty of people who have 1,000 videos. Well, what kind of a legacy? How am I leaving my idea behind with 1,000 videos? Who's going to plow through 1,000 hours of video to try to figure out what I'm saying? They wouldn't even know where to begin or where to go. It'd be absurd. 100 is too many. But I've tried to curate out as many as possible, just to keep it at that, so that it's manageable, so you can go, oh. And I have a page called the Chris Ott Hub, which I will put under too, along with that book by Berkeley, if you scroll down. But I want to limit it. I want it to be, followable. And I want to say something about the order in which, if anybody ever looks at these with the desire to know what I was talking about, I would say that it's best to follow the order in which I did these, and I've been adding dates when I can to when I film these. But there's another benefit to watching the later videos first. But when I say, no, I don't mean this and the one before. I mean the series. So, because they got better, they got clearer. How to express myself got much more refined. What I was expressing remained identical. But how to convey it, I believe, got better. And so the following series were done in this order. I did a lot of stuff up until I did a series called On Cause. Now, I don't think that's the best form, but it was an early attempt to run through the subject of causation, because it was going to be important. And you could watch those, but it's less important than the one that's called What Meher Baba Really Taught. That's very, very important starts out pretty bad. Some of mine, I get a rough start because I'm not quite sure how I'm going to organize my thoughts. But then that gets better. There's a lot of those that are very good. And there's actually, I think, 20 of those. And they're called What Meher Baba Really Taught. And then there's a series called Metaphysics. And I totally recommend that. A lot is in there. It's important. If for anybody who wants to know what I'm saying. And then there's this series called the Psychic Emergent Universe, which is another way of just saying the evolution of perception, but in a way that might capture people's imagination better. They might go, oh, what's that? The Psychic Emergent Universe. And in the part 1, I explain what I mean by all those words, psychic and emergent. Of course, everybody knows what the universe is. But I actually clarify that too, because by the universe, I mean the phenomenal universe, that which you experience, whether it's thought or emotions or physical objects around you. All of it. All of that is the universe, our universe that we live in. Unless you live in another one. But I live in this one, the world of experience. I'm joking. We all live in the world of experience, but sometimes we don't realize it. And that's all in those series. And then there's a few others that are of value, but they're more directly about Meher Baba. And one of them is called How Meher Baba Used the Word Sanskaras. That's a video I did. What Meher Baba meant by reincarnation, which is different than ordinary reincarnation, although that's duplicated in some other videos. But that's a good video. That's a good video. And then one called The Point. And it is about one word in Meher Baba's main book, and which he calls the Om point or creation point or Bindu point. It gives many names, but it's always a point. So it has a double meaning, like the point I'm trying to make, and talking about that word point because it's been clearly misinterpreted by the followers of Meher Baba, and so they have never really been able to make heads or tails out of what he's saying, and that's totally understandable. For the same reason that St. Augustine or Berkeley couldn't have talked the way I talk because certain concepts didn't exist in the 5th century or the 18th century, which do now. So these Baba people, they grew up in little households in New Jersey or whatever, and they don't have these concepts either. So when they read Baba, they don't know what to make of it. So I've tried to help, because in that is that revolution in man's thinking that Meher Baba said he came to bring about. The slowest of all revolutions. Slower than the Copernican revolution. The Copernican revolution was about 100 years. So this is going to take a long time. And I don't need to see it happen because I've already seen it up here. I get it. This is the future. This is the future. I think I've made myself more clear now what I've been doing for the last few years, and really 20 years. And like I said, if I do more videos, it's going to be on something else, like what is a duck? Anyway, thank you for following these. If you're interested, you can go back and watch some of those series. They're all. I just have 2 YouTube channels, but under each video, I have a place called the Chris Ott Hub that links to other platforms like BitChute and so forth, Rumble, and these are there too. And they're now, some of them are on Facebook even. Any platform I can put videos. And you'll find my first book is absolutely free and downloadable. And so is my second one, a second edition I'm working on. You can download it for free too, or you can buy it for very little on Amazon, because they have it on sale very often. It doesn't sell very well. And that's I never expected it to. But anyway, I'm done. I don't know what to add. Have a great It's Friday. Have a good weekend. See you when I see you. Bye-bye.